Hello and welcome to this video on the role of entrepreneurs. By the end of this video, we should be able to explain what an entrepreneur is, but also the different roles an entrepreneur has, and there are four we're going to look at. And secondly, some of the barriers to entrepreneurship, reasons why people don't become entrepreneurs. So let's start with the obvious question, what exactly is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is a person who spots an opportunity and shows initiative and a willingness to take risks in order to benefit from the potential rewards. And this is an important definition, so it's crucial that we write this down in our notes. Entrepreneurs are risk takers. They spot opportunities and are passionate about their business ideas. So once you've got that definition down, you might want to pause the video, then we'll move on. The first role of an entrepreneur is to create and setting up the business. And they would normally go through these sorts of processes. Step one would be an entrepreneur comes up with an idea for a product or a service. They would then do some research to see if that product or service already exists, to see if it's a viable business opportunity. There would then be a stage of planning, how they're going to put their business together, financing, where they're going to get the money from, location, where they're going to set up, what resources do they need, and then finally the entrepreneur is ready to launch and start their business. The second role of an entrepreneur is to now run and expand their business once it's been set up. And that might involve things like producing the good or service, purchasing and managing the stock that they're going to sell in the business, managing their employees within the business, and marketing, that is attracting customers and trying to sell their products. They would also need to look over the overall financial health of the business to make sure that they've got revenue coming in, they're keeping their costs down, and are making a good profit. The third role of an entrepreneur is to think about risk and uncertainty in the business. So entrepreneurs, as we said earlier, are people who take risks. They commit their own personal resources that could be lost, and they set up businesses and make investment decisions. Now, entrepreneurs will try and minimize the risk of things going wrong. And there are a number of different strategies that they might use in order to do this. They could do some market research. They could use certain tools like probability or decision trees to help decide which investment is going to be in the best. They could avoid investments with a low probability of success. And they might do that by choosing investments that are relatively low cost. The entrepreneur will also be keen to minimize uncertainty or think about the risk that's involved in an uncertain environment. Because they can't control everything. They can control what's happening within their own business, but there might be things outside their control, like perhaps a new competitor entering the market or a change in the economy, which will create uncertainty for their business and increase the risk. And they will try and manage this by looking at potential uncertainty that may occur and trying to deal with it. They might look under these sorts of categories: political, economic, social, and so on. So businesses can plan for uncertain events by making a contingency plan or a bit of a backup plan. So this is our third role of an entrepreneur, and I would take down a few little bits and pieces from this. Perhaps the important thing would be that they deal with risk and uncertainty. Once you've got that down, let's move on. Okay, the fourth role of an entrepreneur is to be innovative. And that is coming up with a new idea or invention, which is then launched onto the market, normally with a view to gain financially, to make a profit from it. Entrepreneurs often look to try and protect their innovations and stop others from copying them. An example of an entrepreneur who was very innovative would be Steve Jobs, who founded Apple and had a good idea for his original Mac computer. So we've looked at the roles of an entrepreneur, the four main roles. We should also consider that an entrepreneur is the person who spots the opportunity and sets up the business to benefit from the potential reward. But once the business is set up and running, they would then become the leader of the business. And these two are slightly different roles. Being an entrepreneur in the early stages is slightly different to becoming a leader within the team of staff once the business is operating. So entrepreneurs need to consider this transition. So the typical entrepreneur would be enthusiastic, energetic, creative. Sometimes they're impatient and a risk taker. They're often quite strong personalities who are kind of almost dictatorial in their leadership styles. And these are likely to be important factors in the early stage of a business, as they can make decisions quickly without hesitation. But once the business starts to grow and they need to employ people, actually the role of an entrepreneur turns to become more of a leader, and it's more about. An example would be this man, if you don't recognize him, is Walt Disney, who's founded the Disney Corporation. And he was initially an entrepreneur, but he was very powerful in terms of his leadership style. And for a long time after he left the business, other staff would ask themselves, what would Walt have done that? And so they were not really being trained to take their own decisions. So he didn't really fulfill the transition here from being an entrepreneur to becoming a leader. A company that have managed this transition quite successfully would be Google. Larry Page and Sergey Brin have done a good job at having set up the business, being entrepreneurs, now becoming leaders and empowering their staff. So entrepreneurs must learn to delegate as they move from entrepreneur to a leader as their business grows. So what might stop people becoming entrepreneurs? You might want to become an entrepreneur, but what might be reasons that would hold you back? Well, first of all, perhaps a lack of access to finance. You need a fair bit of money to be able to set up a business, and that might be one of the drawbacks. You might not have the know-how or the skills, and we would describe that as being a lack of entrepreneurial capacity to to set up a business. You might be very risk averse and not want to take on the risk, or you might just not have any good ideas. Some entrepreneurs have also faced difficulty not just becoming entrepreneurs, but also making that transition from entrepreneur to leader. We mentioned Steve Jobs earlier, and he was a very good entrepreneur, very kind of dictatorial and had a good vision for his business in the early days. But as he became a leader, he found it slightly more difficult to trust other people and work with other people within his business. And that's an interesting story we might look at. So in this video, we've looked at the role of an entrepreneur. We should have some notes on the 4 main roles. And we've also looked at the barriers to entrepreneurship. Again, we should have some notes on those. You've reached the end of the video. Time to put your feet up and have a cuppa.